Cops humiliated black returning soldier at airport. His general was standing right behind them. The bright fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors, making everything look neat and busy. Among the crowd, a man in a crisp military uniform walked steadily, his shoulders straight, his chest carrying the weight of months spent far from home. His boots clicked softly against the floor, a quiet rhythm that seemed out of place amid the chatter of families and travelers. This was Sergeant Marcus Johnson, a soldier who had recently returned from deployment overseas. He had spent the past 8 months serving his country, far from his family, his friends, and the comfort of familiar surroundings. Each step toward the exit brought him closer to the embrace of loved ones he had missed dearly. As Marcus moved toward the baggage claim area, his uniform immediately drew glances from some of the people passing by. Some offered nods of respect, while others barely noticed him in the stream of travelers. Despite the attention, or lack thereof, he felt a quiet pride. He had completed a mission that demanded discipline, courage, and resilience, and he wore his uniform as a symbol of that achievement. Yet, even in the midst of this personal pride, he could feel the exhaustion settling in his bones. Months of disrupted sleep, long hours of vigilance, and the mental strain of service overseas were all catching up to him. He shifted the weight of his duffel bag from one shoulder to the other, silently wishing for a moment to breathe. It was just as he reached the corner near the security checkpoint that he noticed 2 police officers approaching him. At first, Marcus thought they might simply be making their rounds, ensuring the safety of travelers in the crowded terminal. But as they drew closer, he sensed something different in their demeanor. Their eyes scanned him with a kind of scrutiny that felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. Marcus instinctively slowed his pace, trying to maintain a calm and respectful presence. "Sir, can we have a word?" one of the officers asked, his tone polite but carrying an undercurrent of authority. Marcus nodded, setting his bag down briefly to show that he was cooperative. "Of course," he said, his voice steady. He had been trained to stay calm in tense situations, but a knot of unease was forming in his stomach. The officers motioned for him to step aside toward a less crowded area near the security gates. Travelers continued to pass by, some glancing curiously at the unfolding interaction. Marcus followed, keeping his hands visible and maintaining eye contact. He could hear snippets of their questions as they began speaking in rapid tones, asking about his travel plans, his luggage, and even the details of his deployment. Marcus answered politely, explaining that he had just returned from serving overseas, carrying his own identification and orders. Despite his cooperation, the officers seemed skeptical. They asked the same questions multiple times, as though his answers were insufficient. Marcus could feel the tension rising, a mix of frustration and disbelief simmering beneath his calm exterior. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and extreme stress during his service, yet here he was, being questioned and treated with suspicion in a place that was supposed to welcome him home. As the questions continued, Marcus noticed people stopping to watch. Some whispered to each other, others simply stared in silence. He felt a wave of self-consciousness, as if every step and every word was being scrutinized by strangers. The officers leaned closer, their voices carrying an edge that made the situation feel more intense than necessary. Marcus's training urged him to remain composed, to respond respectfully, and to avoid escalating the situation. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that he had endured far greater challenges before. Despite his efforts, one of the officers made a comment that struck Marcus sharply. It was a remark about his appearance, framed as a casual observation but laced with assumptions that felt unfair and biased. Marcus froze for a moment, considering whether to respond or stay silent. He chose the latter, recognizing that confrontation could worsen the situation. Instead, he focused on keeping his composure, hoping that the officers would realize his legitimacy on their own. As the minutes passed, Marcus could feel his pride mixing with frustration. He had served his country with honor, yet he was being treated as though he were a suspect rather than a returning hero. The uniform on his back, which represented months of dedication and sacrifice, seemed to matter little in this moment. He shifted his weight again, trying to remain steady despite the discomfort of being humiliated in public. Meanwhile, the crowd around them continued its rhythm of travel. Children ran ahead of their parents, Business people checked their phones, and flight announcements echoed over the speakers. Some travelers stopped to watch the interaction unfold, curiosity and concern written on their faces. Marcus could feel the silent judgment of strangers, some of it sympathetic, some of it indifferent. Yet he knew that remaining calm was the only way to maintain dignity in a situation that felt increasingly unfair. Finally, one of the officers asked Marcus to step aside for a more thorough check of his belongings. Marcus complied, setting down his duffel bag carefully and opening it for inspection. He could feel the weight of every eye in the terminal, the quiet judgments of strangers adding to the sting of the moment. As the officer rifled through his bag, Marcus focused on his breathing, silently counting each inhale and exhale. He thought about his family waiting at the arrival gate, imagining their smiling faces and the relief that would wash over him when he finally reached them. Through all of this, Marcus tried to maintain perspective. He reminded himself that his service had been meaningful, that he had accomplished important work overseas, and that this moment of humiliation, though painful, did not define him. He thought about the discipline and resilience that had carried him through his deployment, and he drew strength from those experiences. Even in the face of unfair treatment, he could hold on to the dignity and pride that came from serving his country. As the officers continued their questioning, Marcus noticed a figure walking nearby, a senior military officer in civilian clothes. The officer's eyes scanned the terminal, taking in the surroundings with a calm authority. Marcus did not recognize him immediately, but something about the presence felt reassuring. He kept his focus on the officers, determined not to let the situation unravel. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling longer than the last. Marcus answered the officers' questions carefully, repeating information as needed while maintaining a respectful tone. He felt the tension in his shoulders, the ache of months of service pressing down on him, and the frustration of being judged unfairly in public. Yet he also felt a quiet resolve. He would endure this just as he had endured countless challenges before. Finally, the officer conducting the inspection looked up, pausing for a moment as if reconsidering. Marcus held his breath, unsure what would happen next. He felt a mixture of relief and apprehension, knowing that the situation could still take an unexpected turn. Yet through it all, he reminded himself that he had already proven his strength and integrity in far more difficult circumstances than this. In that moment, Marcus realized that returning home was not just about stepping off the plane. It was about navigating the complexities of civilian life, the assumptions people made, and the biases that still existed in the world around him. He thought about the sacrifices he had made, the friends he had lost, and the lessons he had learned. And he understood that, no matter the humiliation he faced in that terminal, his service and his character would remain intact. As he waited for the officers to finish, Marcus felt a quiet determination rising within him. He would meet this challenge with the same resilience he had shown overseas. He would maintain his dignity, honor his service, and continue forward step by step toward the embrace of the people who truly mattered, his family, his friends, and those who recognized the courage it took to serve. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as the officers stepped closer, signaling for him to move toward a less crowded area. He complied, trying to maintain calm, but inside, frustration began to build. He had served his country with honor, yet now he was being treated as though he were a troublemaker, his uniform doing little to earn him respect in this moment. The bright lights of the terminal seemed to glare at him, reflecting off his polished shoes as if the world itself were judging him. One officer leaned toward him, voice low but firm. "We need to check your identification and luggage more carefully," he said. Marcus nodded and reached into his pocket to retrieve his ID, handing it over politely. The officer took it slowly, flipping it over in his hands as if examining every detail. Marcus's eyes followed him, trying to gauge the officer's mood. Each passing second felt heavier than the last. The second officer circled around, examining Marcus's uniform with a scrutinizing gaze. His eyes lingered on the badges, the patches, and the insignia of rank. Marcus could sense the unspoken assumptions behind their gaze, assumptions that had nothing to do with his service or character. He shifted slightly, keeping his posture straight, determined not to let them see the sting of their words and actions. "Where exactly were you deployed?" the first officer asked again, his tone bordering on disbelief. Marcus replied patiently, "I was stationed overseas for 8 months, working with my unit on security and humanitarian missions." The officer frowned, as if he expected a different answer. Marcus repeated himself calmly, careful not to let irritation creep into his voice. He had faced life-threatening situations abroad. Answering repetitive questions from airport police was frustrating, but he knew he had to remain composed. The officer leaned closer, squinting at Marcus. "We just want to be sure you're not hiding anything," he said. Marcus felt a wave of humiliation. He was standing in a public space, being questioned and doubted despite wearing the uniform that should have earned him respect. He could feel the eyes of travelers on him, some curious, some judging, and some simply confused. A mother holding a small child glanced his way, her child pointing at the uniform with innocent curiosity. Marcus forced a smile, trying to mask the mix of embarrassment and anger rising within him. As the questioning continued, the officers began rifling through his duffel bag. Marcus watched silently, taking care not to raise his voice or make sudden movements. His personal belongings were examined with meticulous care. Folded clothes were unfolded, small items picked up and scrutinized. Each action felt like a violation, a challenge to his dignity. Marcus's mind wandered for a moment to his family waiting outside the terminal, imagining their faces and the relief that would wash over them once this ordeal was over. Despite his efforts to remain calm, one officer made a remark that cut deeper than any question. "I didn't expect someone like you to be in the military," he said casually, as if speaking to a stranger about a passing thought. Marcus froze, his hands tightening around the straps of his bag. The words were unnecessary, unfair, and hurtful. He considered responding, but he knew that arguing would likely make the situation worse. Instead, he focused on steadying his breathing, reminding himself that this moment, painful as it was, did not define him. The crowd of travelers began to notice the tension. A few stopped walking, watching the interaction unfold. Some whispered quietly to each other, others simply stared in silence. Marcus could feel their gaze, the mix of sympathy and curiosity pressing on him like invisible hands. He straightened his shoulders, refusing to let their attention make him flinch. He had faced far more dangerous situations than this. This was merely a test of patience and resilience. As the officers continued their inspection, Marcus's thoughts drifted to his service overseas. He remembered the long nights spent on guard duty, the moments of fear and uncertainty, and the small victories that had kept him going. He thought about his unit, the bonds they had formed, and the sacrifices they had made together. These memories gave him strength. He knew that no comment or action from the officers could erase his accomplishments or the pride he felt in serving his country. Minutes passed slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. The officers asked questions repeatedly, their tone shifting from procedural to skeptical. Marcus answered each one carefully, maintaining respect, even as frustration built within him. He realized that this was not just about his identity as a soldier. It was about assumptions and bias, about people judging him before they knew who he was. He felt a mix of anger and determination, knowing that his response in this moment mattered more than the officer's words. One of the officers began checking the smaller compartments of Marcus's bag. He lifted up pouches, examined documents, and even looked through a small journal Marcus had kept during his deployment. Each action felt intrusive, as if the officers were trying to find a reason to doubt him. Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the officer, his expression neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him upset. He thought about how he had endured more dangerous challenges overseas. This was frustrating, yes, but it was also temporary. At one point, the officer made a dismissive comment about Marcus's age and experience, implying that someone so young could not possibly have handled the responsibilities of deployment. Marcus felt a surge of irritation, but he swallowed it. He replied calmly, "I have completed all required training and served with my unit overseas for 8 months. I have handled every responsibility assigned to me." His voice was steady, but the intensity of his words carried the weight of truth. Travelers continued to pass by, some pausing to watch. Marcus noticed a young man in a business suit whispering to a friend, glancing at him with surprise. A family nearby exchanged concerned looks. Marcus felt a mix of embarrassment and pride. Embarrassment at being publicly scrutinized, Pride in knowing that the truth of his service was evident to those who looked closely. He reminded himself that dignity was maintained not by the opinions of strangers, but by the strength of character he carried within him. The officers seemed unconvinced. They asked more questions about his deployment, the details of his travel plans, and the purpose of his trip. Marcus answered each one thoroughly, giving as much information as needed without over-explaining. He noticed the subtle changes in their body language, the slight hesitation, the pauses in their speech, and he realized that his calm and confident responses were beginning to make an impact. Yet the humiliation lingered. The comments, the repeated questioning, and the public scrutiny weighed on him. Marcus felt the sting of unfair treatment, the frustration of being judged based on appearance rather than merit. He thought about his fellow soldiers, wondering if any of them had experienced similar situations. He reflected on the broader reality that bias existed even in places where respect and honor should have been automatic. Despite the discomfort, Marcus continued to hold his ground. He kept his voice steady, his posture upright, and his focus on the truth of his service. He reminded himself that this experience, though challenging, was temporary. The pride he carried from his accomplishments overseas, the lessons he had learned, and the strength of his character were far more enduring than any moment of public humiliation. As the officers continued their inspection, Marcus began to notice something unexpected. A figure in plain clothes, moving calmly through the terminal, seemed to be observing the situation. Marcus didn't recognize the man at first, but there was a sense of authority in his posture, a quiet assurance that stood out amid the chaos of the terminal. Marcus's heart lifted slightly. He sensed that this observer could change the dynamic of the situation. The minutes dragged on, and Marcus's patience was tested. He thought about the homecoming he had imagined for months, the reunion with family and friends, and the relief of finally being back in familiar surroundings. He focused on these thoughts, letting them anchor him amidst the uncertainty and discomfort. Each deep breath helped him maintain composure, each calm response reinforced his dignity. Finally, one of the officers paused, glancing at Marcus with a questioning expression. Marcus held his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear or frustration. He knew that maintaining respect, even in the face of unfair treatment, was a form of strength. He reminded himself that his service, his sacrifices, and his achievements were real and undeniable, regardless of the assumptions of others. In that tense moment, Marcus realized that his return home was more complex than he had imagined. It was not just about stepping off the plane. It was about navigating a world that sometimes judged too quickly, about confronting bias with patience and dignity, and about holding on to the pride of one's accomplishments even when others failed to recognize them. He shifted his weight slightly, squared his shoulders, and waited for the next question. He was ready to continue, ready to endure, and ready to reclaim the respect he had earned through years of service and sacrifice. Though the humiliation was real, so was his resolve, and Marcus knew that he would not let this moment define him. Marcus had been standing patiently as the officers scrutinized his identification and belongings, repeating questions that he had already answered carefully. Each minute felt heavier than the last, his pride and frustration mixing into a quiet storm inside him. He had endured countless challenges overseas, but nothing in his training could have prepared him for the sense of humiliation he now felt, being doubted and questioned in a public place despite wearing the uniform of his country. He shifted slightly, trying to keep his posture straight, his hands visible and his voice steady. As one officer rifled through his duffel bag again, Marcus's mind wandered to his family, waiting somewhere beyond the airport security line. He imagined the smile of his mother, the hug of his younger sister, and the pride in his father's eyes. These thoughts gave him strength, anchoring him in the middle of the storm. He reminded himself that this was only a temporary situation, that he had faced far greater dangers and challenges in his service overseas. His pride in his accomplishments remained intact, even as the world around him seemed to question his very presence. It was in that moment, while Marcus remained calm and composed despite the officers' aggressive questioning, that he noticed a figure walking steadily through the terminal. The man moved with quiet authority, his eyes scanning the surroundings with careful attention. At first, Marcus didn't recognize him, but there was something about the way he carried himself that commanded respect. There was a calm confidence in every step, a presence that seemed to fill the space around him. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as realization struck. This was his commanding general. The general had come through the terminal for a routine visit, unaware that his soldier was now facing such an ordeal. As he observed the scene from a distance, his eyes narrowed slightly. The soldier being questioned was unmistakable, Marcus Johnson, one of the most dedicated and capable members of his unit. The general's mind quickly assessed the situation, noting the tension, the officer's body language, and the crowd gathering around them. Something about the way the officers spoke to Marcus felt wrong, disrespectful, and unnecessary. Marcus, meanwhile, had spotted the general and felt a surge of relief. He straightened his posture even more, trying to convey calm, dignity, and confidence. Seeing someone he respected in a position of authority gave him a sense of reassurance. It reminded him that the truth of his service would be recognized by those who truly understood his dedication and sacrifice. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for whatever came next. The general approached, moving deliberately and confidently toward the scene. As he neared, the officers seemed to become aware of his presence, though they did not immediately recognize him. The general's eyes locked onto Marcus, and he spoke in a firm yet calm tone, addressing the officers directly. "Excuse me, what seems to be the problem here?" His voice carried authority, quiet but unyielding. The officers hesitated, glancing at each other nervously. The tone of the question suggested that this was no ordinary interaction. This was a situation requiring careful explanation. Marcus watched as the officers shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered something about routine security checks, trying to maintain a professional tone. The general's expression did not change. He continued to look at Marcus, then back at the officers, his gaze steady and unwavering. It was clear to everyone nearby that the general expected answers, and that he would not accept vague or dismissive explanations. The general's presence seemed to alter the energy in the terminal. Bystanders who had been watching quietly now leaned in slightly, sensing that something important was happening. Some passengers whispered to each other, while others simply stared, curiosity written across their faces. Marcus felt a quiet sense of vindication, knowing that someone who understood the weight of his service was now present. He remained composed, even as a wave of relief and pride washed over him. The officers finally spoke, attempting to explain their actions. "We were just performing standard checks," one of them said. "We needed to verify his identification and travel plans." The general raised an eyebrow, his expression unchanging. "And how does treating a decorated soldier in full uniform this way qualify as standard?" he asked. His voice was calm, but every word carried a weight that made the officers pause. Marcus could see the shift in their demeanor. The confidence with which they had treated him just moments before was now replaced by uncertainty and apprehension. Marcus remained silent, letting the general handle the confrontation. He felt a mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a sense of justice finally taking its place. He watched as the general calmly but firmly addressed the officers, questioning their judgment and reminding them of the soldiers' service. The general's words were precise, emphasizing respect, recognition, and fairness, and it was clear that he expected the officers to respond appropriately. The crowd around them continued to observe in silence, the tension in the terminal palpable. Marcus could feel the stares of strangers, some sympathetic, some surprised, and some impressed by the commanding presence of the general. He thought about how far he had come, from the challenges of deployment overseas to this moment of public scrutiny, and he realized that he had endured everything with patience and dignity. Now, finally, he was being seen and acknowledged in a way that reflected his true worth. One of the officers attempted to maintain control of the situation, insisting that their actions were justified. The general, however, did not waver. "This soldier has served his country with honor. Your actions have caused unnecessary humiliation and discomfort. I expect that this situation will be corrected immediately." His tone was firm but not aggressive, conveying authority without anger. Marcus felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that someone in a position of true authority was defending him. As the general spoke, Marcus reflected on the injustice he had just endured. The humiliation, the repeated questioning, and the assumptions made about him based on appearance were painful, but they were also temporary. What mattered most was that his service and character were recognized by someone who truly understood their value. He felt a renewed sense of confidence, strengthened by the knowledge that dignity and respect could not be taken away by unfair treatment. The officers, now visibly uncomfortable, began to step back slightly. The general continued to address them, ensuring that they understood the seriousness of their actions. Marcus could see that the presence of a higher authority had shifted the balance of power in the situation. What had begun as a moment of frustration and humiliation was now transforming into one of recognition and justice. Marcus took a moment to breathe deeply, letting the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. He kept his eyes on the officers, maintaining a calm and composed expression. He did not speak unless spoken to, knowing that the general's presence and words carried more weight than anything he could say at that moment. The crowd around them remained silent, sensing the importance of the interaction and the shift in dynamics. The general finally turned to Marcus, giving him a reassuring nod. "Thank you for your patience," he said quietly, his voice meant only for Marcus. "You have handled this situation with the same dignity and strength that you have shown throughout your service." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude and pride. These words, coming from someone he respected deeply, carried far more weight than any official recognition or award. It was a moment of validation, a recognition that his endurance and character had not gone unnoticed. The officers, now fully aware of the general's authority and presence, began to withdraw, muttering apologies and explanations. Marcus watched them step aside, feeling a quiet sense of relief. The humiliation he had endured was being acknowledged, and the situation was finally moving toward resolution. He remained composed, knowing that his behavior had contributed to the eventual turning of events. His patience, dignity, and calm had allowed the truth to emerge without conflict or escalation. As the officers left, the crowd of travelers began to resume their movement, some offering nods of respect or words of encouragement to Marcus. He felt a mixture of relief and pride, knowing that he had maintained his integrity even in a challenging and unfair situation. The general stayed close for a moment, ensuring that Marcus was safe and supported before walking with him toward the exit. Marcus reflected on the experience as he moved through the terminal, flanked by the general and finally free from the scrutiny of the officers. He thought about the challenges of returning home, the assumptions people made, and the importance of allies in positions of authority. He understood that moments of injustice could be mitigated when met with patience, dignity, and support from those who recognized true value. By the time they reached the exit, Marcus could see his family waiting on the other side. Their faces lit up with joy, relief, and pride as they rushed toward him. He embraced them tightly, feeling the weight of the past hours melt away. In that embrace, Marcus understood that the struggle he had faced in the terminal, though painful, had reaffirmed his own strength and resilience. The general gave a final nod of encouragement before stepping away, leaving Marcus to reunite with his loved ones. Marcus knew that this experience, though difficult, would stay with him as a reminder of both the challenges he had overcome and the support that could make a difference in moments of unfair treatment. He walked forward with his family, proud of his service, proud of his endurance, and ready to continue building the life he had worked so hard to protect and serve. Marcus walked through the terminal with his family at his side, their hands gripping his tightly. The weight of the past hours, the humiliation, the stress, the repeated questioning, still lingered in his chest, but it was slowly being replaced by relief and warmth. The bright lights of the airport seemed less harsh now, softened by the smiles and familiar voices of the people he loved most. Every step he took felt lighter, as though each movement carried away some of the tension that had built up during the confrontation with the officers. His mother, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, spoke first. "Marcus, I was so worried. I can't believe they treated you like that." Her voice trembled with emotion, a mixture of anger and concern. Marcus squeezed her hand and nodded. "I'm okay, Mom," he said gently, his voice calm despite the storm of feelings inside him. "It was difficult, yes, but I made it through." His younger sister, barely able to contain her excitement, ran ahead to wrap him in a tight hug. "I missed you so much," she exclaimed. Marcus laughed softly, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease as he returned her embrace. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to feel the comfort of home, the relief of being surrounded by love, and the security that came from knowing he was among people who valued him for who he truly was. As they walked toward the exit, Marcus's mind reflected on the events of the day. The humiliation at the hands of the officers had been painful and unfair. Being doubted and questioned, despite his uniform and accomplishments, had challenged his patience and resilience. But through it all, he had maintained his composure, answering every question respectfully and refusing to let anger dictate his actions. He realized that this restraint had allowed the situation to be resolved without escalation, and it had ultimately preserved his dignity. The intervention of his commanding general had been a turning point. Marcus thought about how the presence of someone in authority who understood his service and recognized his value had changed everything. It was a reminder that even in moments of injustice, allies and supporters could make a profound difference. He felt gratitude toward the general, knowing that without his intervention, the ordeal might have continued longer, leaving deeper scars. As they stepped outside into the fresh air, Marcus inhaled deeply, feeling the cool breeze fill his lungs. The sunlight bathed the airport grounds in a warm glow, and he could see people walking past, unaware of the emotional turbulence he had just experienced. The contrast between the chaos of the terminal and the calm of the outdoors was striking. For Marcus, it symbolized the shift from tension to relief, from humiliation to recognition, and from isolation to connection. His father joined them, embracing Marcus with a mix of pride and concern. "I can't believe they treated you like that," he said, his voice low but firm. Marcus smiled softly. "It's done now," he replied. "What matters is that I stayed calm and that the truth came through. Nothing they did can take away what I've accomplished." As the family walked to their car, Marcus reflected on the broader meaning of the experience. He had faced challenges overseas that tested his courage, resilience, and dedication. He had worked alongside his unit to complete difficult missions, often under extreme conditions. Yet here at home, he encountered a challenge of a different kind, one that tested his patience, dignity, and ability to handle unfair treatment in a public space. He realized that the lesson was not just about the encounter with the officers, but about life itself. People may sometimes judge based on appearances or assumptions. Injustice and bias can appear even in places where respect is expected. However, maintaining integrity, composure, and self-respect can turn even the most difficult situations into opportunities for growth and reflection. Marcus felt a deep sense of pride, not only in his service overseas, but also in the way he had conducted himself under pressure at the airport. As they drove home, Marcus thought about the reactions of the travelers who had witnessed the confrontation. Some had watched in surprise, some in confusion, and some in silent support. He realized that his actions, combined with the intervention of the general, had not only protected his own dignity, but also demonstrated to others the importance of patience, courage, and respect. The experience had become more than a personal challenge. It was a moment that could inspire reflection and understanding in others. When they arrived at the family home, Marcus was greeted by neighbors and friends who had gathered to welcome him back. The air was filled with laughter, conversation, and the warmth of a community celebrating one of their own. Marcus felt a profound sense of belonging. For months, he had been away, serving a purpose that often took him to dangerous and unfamiliar places. Now he was back among people who valued him not just for his service, but for the person he was. Inside the house, Marcus sat with his family, recounting his journey and reflecting on the events at the airport. He described the officers, questioning, the moments of humiliation, and the overwhelming sense of frustration he had felt. Yet he also spoke of the presence of his general, the calm authority that had restored fairness, and the reassurance that came from being recognized and supported. His family listened intently, their eyes filled with empathy and pride. Marcus understood that this story, while personal, had broader implications. It highlighted the challenges that individuals can face when returning from service, the importance of allies and authority figures in ensuring justice, and the resilience required to navigate unfair situations. He thought about the other soldiers who might face similar experiences, returning home only to encounter misunderstanding or bias. He felt a sense of responsibility to share his experience, to use it as a lesson in patience, dignity, and the power of recognition and support. As the evening progressed, Marcus reflected quietly, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set. The colors of the sky shifted from bright orange to deep purple, signaling the end of a long day. He felt a sense of closure, knowing that the humiliation he had endured would not define him. Instead, it had reinforced the values he had carried throughout his service: resilience, patience, integrity, and the quiet strength to maintain dignity even in the face of injustice. He also thought about the people who had witnessed the event, including travelers in the terminal. Marcus hoped that his calm and composed response, along with the intervention of the general, had left an impression. Perhaps it had shown others that respect, fairness, and recognition are important, and that standing by principles even when challenged can make a difference. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that his actions could inspire awareness and empathy in ways he had not anticipated. Later, as Marcus prepared for a well-deserved rest, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The months of service overseas, the long nights of vigilance, the moments of danger and uncertainty, all of it had prepared him for challenges both seen and unseen. The confrontation at the airport, though different in nature, was another test of the same qualities that had guided him throughout his career: discipline, courage, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. He thought about the future, knowing that there would be other challenges, both personal and professional. Yet he felt confident that he could navigate them with the same resilience and strength he had demonstrated at the airport and during his deployment. Marcus understood that life was full of unexpected obstacles, but that each challenge also carried the potential for growth, learning, and reflection. As the house grew quiet and his family settled into the comfort of home, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. The ordeal at the airport was behind him, resolved with dignity and support. He had faced humiliation and unfair treatment, but he had emerged with his pride intact, strengthened by the presence of allies and the recognition of his service. He realized that the journey of returning home was not just about physical arrival, but about reclaiming respect, dignity, and a sense of belonging. In the days that followed, Marcus shared his story with friends, fellow soldiers, and his community. He emphasized the lessons learned, the importance of patience, the power of maintaining composure, and the impact that authority and support can have in correcting unfair situations. His story became a source of inspiration, demonstrating that even in moments of injustice, integrity and courage could prevail. Marcus also reflected on his role as a soldier and a citizen. He understood that the experiences he had endured, both overseas and at home, were part of a larger journey. They had shaped him, strengthened him, and provided insights that could help others navigate similar challenges. He felt a renewed commitment to serve not only through his military duties, but also by setting an example of dignity, patience, and resilience in everyday life. As time passed, Marcus continued to integrate back into civilian life, carrying the lessons from his service and his airport experience with him. He remained proud of his accomplishments, aware of the challenges he had faced, and grateful for the support of his family, his commanding general, and the community around him. He understood that life would continue to present obstacles, but that each challenge was an opportunity to demonstrate the strength of character that defined him. Looking back on that day at the airport, Marcus no longer felt the sting of humiliation. Instead, he felt gratitude for the experience and the lessons it provided. He realized that even moments of unfair treatment could lead to growth, reflection, and the reinforcement of one's values. He had faced doubt, scrutiny, and judgment, yet he had maintained his dignity, earned recognition, and returned home stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever.